Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Nun Hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Adam Plunka in loving memory of his grandfather, Yochmel Hirsch ben Yisrael, Harry Plunka. Today's daf is sponsored by Blima Shorchen in loving memory of her father, Yitzchak Tzvi ben Blima B'chaim Shimon. And today's daf is sponsored by Raya, Lily, Kyra, Aliza, Lucy, and Eden, students of Abby Sasland in loving memory of her mother, Judy Sasland, Zichrona Livracha. Though we did not know your mother personally, we knew that her love, compassion, and wisdom made you the role model you are for us today. For every student you've taught, we hope to be here for you and want to celebrate your mother's life with all of our timbrels. Okay, we're going to get started now with, we're going to finish up our topic today, although it will take us to the end of the day, of issues relating to, we're going to start with both homosexual relations and bestiality, and then we're going to end with a very long sugya about some issues that come up regarding bestiality. I will point out one thing. Bestiality, the whole concept is a little bit strange to us. But I remember the first cycle when I was teaching, there was a woman who was a tour guide who was learning with me, who told me she was reading a book at the time about the Roman culture. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but she was saying that it was talking about the Roman culture in the times of the Talmud. And really one of the things that were rampant in Roman culture was bestiality. So while it seems so far into us and not so common, but apparently it was in the time, and perhaps that's why there's a lot of discussion about it. Anyway, with that, let's get started. So there's a study guide which will help you organize the daf. I'm not going to share screen probably, but you can follow along with it if you have it in front of you. Tanu Rabbanan. I'm going to start at the bottom of Nudalit, but we went through this very quickly, and I want to just kind of get started from here. Zachor lo asubo katan kigadol behema suba ktana kigdola. So when it comes to, again, we're comparing issues that come up in homosexual relations versus issues that come up in bestiality. And Zachor, they say a katan is not like a gadol, meaning if one has relations with a katan, right, a gadol sleeps with, has relations with a minor. So again, we're going to discuss what the age of that minor is. If it's under a certain age, that's not going to be considered forbidden. That you're not going to get punished for that. However, in a behema, subaktana kigdola, if a person, a grown person, has relations with an animal, it doesn't matter. There's no minimum age. Okay, like from a day old, it's going to be problematic. So now, what is this katan kegadol? What's the age? I'm not going to read this all inside, but this is what we discussed yesterday. Machloka Rav and Shmuel, whether it's 9 in a day or 3 in a day. Okay, do we say? And that we said the basis of that machloka was Rav holds it's 9 because ite b'shochev, ite b'nishkav. Since there's the man who's initiating and the man who it's happening to, we're going to treat them in the same way, which is the age that goes by men. That's the age that determines it. And according to Shmuel, it's because the pasuk there says mishkavei isha, don't sleep with the man mishkavei isha, which means that the one the one who's the passive participant, if that person is, if the age goes by what a woman's age would be for ra'oi l'bi'ah, and that would be 3 in a day. Why 3 in a day? I know that 3 in a day sounds absurd, and even though we're going to discuss later also 3 in a day, they don't usually mean the person's 3. It's very unlikely it happens. They just determined that was the cutoff. They believed, I don't know based on what, that if you tore a woman's hymen at age 3, it would be torn forever. But if it was under age 3, it wouldn't be. And that's why they determined that was the age. And that's why the age for a woman will be different than a man, because there's a different determining factor. Whether there's evidence to that being true or not, I have no idea. But that is a possible reason why they determined that was the age. Okay, now we're going to bring the last line in Nun Dalet Amabet. Tanya Kavatei de Rav. We're going to have a Braita like Rav, which really only the first line of the Braita interests us, but then we're going to get off on the second line of the Braita, and then we're going to bring 2 different opinions of different rabbis in the Amoraim time period that actually says things different from the Braita, which is a little weird, and the Gemara the Gemara just sort of points it out, but doesn't really address how could that be. But the first line is what's important for this sugya, and then we're going to get on to the second line. Zachal ben tesha shanim v'yom echad. Okay, when we talk about a zachal, mishkav zachal, it has to be that the one who the person's sleeping with is at least 9 and a day. Haba ala be'ema, here's the second line of the Braita. Ben kedarka ben shelo kedarka, v'isham b'vi'at be'ema aleh ben kedarka ben shelo kedarka. When we're talking about bestiality, whether it's a man with an animal or a woman with an animal, Either which way, it's going to be, right? So there's the man who has relations with the animal, the woman who brings the animal on top of her to have relations with her, whether it's in a regular way of having intercourse or whether it's anal intercourse. Both of those are going to be problematic. You're going to be chayav. But Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, Rav Nachman the son of Rav Chisda said, "B'isha shnei mishkavot ubeima mishkav echad." Talking about a woman with an animal, it's both kedarka shelo kedarka, but with an animal, it's only mishkav echad. Now, why does he say that? Because it says mishkavei isha, plural. So they're going to take that to apply to a woman with an animal, and even in both methods. But when it comes to the animal and a man, it's only in regular relations. Matkefla Rav Papa says, Adraba, you would say the opposite, because Isha de Orchehi, Amishkav Mechayev, Amida Machrina Lo Mechayev. You would say when it's with a woman, it would be the normal way of having relations with a woman. It only Biakadarka would be forbidden, but not Biashalo Kadarka, because that's so atypical. But Amishka, but Behema, de Lav Orchehi, Lechayev Aleal Kol Nekev and Nekev. But with the animal, when it's not the normal way of an animal, we would say, any nekev unekev, any hole they go into, it would be problematic, and therefore habala be'ema should be bein kedarka bein shelo kedarka. So Rav Papa says the opposite. Either way, one of them says in one case it's both, in the other case it's one, as opposed to the Braita that said in both cases it's both are going to be obligated. And they point out now, Tanya de loket travayu, and the Braita doesn't match either one of them because now they just quote the Braita again, Zachar ben tesha shanim v'yom echad, which is irrelevant right now. But habala be'ema ben kedarka ben shelo kedarka v'isha meviata be'ema ala ben kedarka ben shelo kedarka chayav. Okay, this Braita doesn't match either approach. Amalei Ravina l'Rava. Second topic. These topics are going to get a little more uncomfortable as we go on, and then we'll get kind of off and back to like things that are a little less uncomfortable for us, or at least for me. Amalei, I can't talk about anyone else here, but Amalei Ravina l'Rava. Hamareb is a whole mahu. Hara'ah is a topic that Gemara talks about a lot because what it means going where the sexual organ goes inside, but not fully. Okay, not complete bi'ah, not complete intercourse. So if you do that in mishkav zachor mahu, so the Gemara says, Hamareb zachor mishkavei shaktive. Now we're going to see this from Psukim, but it's obvious to them that in a case of, let's say, any kind of forbidden relations, father or daughter, something like that, if there's ha'ara'ah, not complete bi'ah, but partial, so partial penetration, that is definitely forbidden. Okay, we're going to see it from the pasuk because it uses the word ha'ara. We're going to see it actually in two pasukim. So they say if by mishkav zachol it says mishkavei isha, the way it is with a woman, then basically you're going to say whatever applies to a woman, ha'ara is a problem. Obviously, it's also a problem there, and you're going to be liable. So that for sure, it can't be you're even asking that question because it's an obvious answer. It must be you got confused. The question must be, okay, they said to Ravina, when you asked Rava this question, you must have meant ma'arabe behemamahu. And then Amarle, he answers him the following. Ime no inyan. Okay, they're going to use an ime no inyan. What's an ime no inyan? And maybe before we even read this inside, I'll show you the psukim. Okay, if you have the study guide, they're in the study guide. It's Vayikra chapter 20, verses 18 and 19. Now, what they're going to do, what's an ime no inyan? An ime no inyan is if there's no point for this to come up in the verse, because it's obvious, then it must become and teach about something else. Okay, because if it's not teaching about its own location, then it must teach about something else. And that's what they're going to use to learn ha'ara be'ema is a problem. Okay, you're going to be liable. So here are the psukim. In Vayikra Kaf, that's in the chapter with all the punishments, it says, Isha she'yishkavet isha dava, if a man sleeps with a woman, his wife, when she's in nida, or any woman who's in nida, Vigilat arvata, okay, reveals her nakedness, et mikora he'era. Here comes the word he'era. Okay, he entered inside of her, right, without complete penetration, they say, because it says he'era. Now, the next pasuk, I'm not going to read the rest of the pasuk. Ervat achot imcha va'achot avicha, if you reveal the erva of the sister of your mother or the sister of your father, your aunt basically, lo tigale, ki et she'ero he'era. Also there it says ha'ara. So this can be unnecessary because they're going to say, that second pasuk you don't need ha'ara. Why? You don't need it. Because nida, the pasuk before, they're juxtaposed in the pasuk. So if it's said it's a problem in the nida, it's obviously a problem here. Therefore, Tanei Unyan Lahara Debema. Okay, now this is a little out of left field, But take the pasuk about your aunt, and we're going to say the word hara there applies to an animal, relations with an animal. Okay, and that's how Rava gets to his answer. The Gemara has a little bit of an issue with this and says, "Michti behemam chayve mito beitin hu he lamadi katav hara dida gabe chayve kritut." The context there are punishments that are punishable by karet in the hands of God. Now, animals are punishable by man in a court of a beitin. So they said, why would they, if they're going to learn in Imeno and Yan, why put it in the context of a karet pasuk to teach about mito beitin? Doesn't make any sense. It should have been a pasuk about a rayot that are punishable by the court. Seems a little bit strange. So the Gemara says, well, since that whole pasuk was unnecessary, the whole pasuk really wasn't needed. Why? Because it already told us it's forbidden in chapter 18. Now, this is a little strange because if you remember, in chapter 18 and chapter 20, they all repeat. So I'm not exactly sure why the Gemara is convinced that whole pasuk is unnecessary, but that's what they claim. The whole pasuk really is unnecessary, and the whole pasuk, therefore, is for drasha. Ktivanami milta de drasha. So that's why that was the pasuk chosen, because for whatever reason, they think this was an unnecessary pasuk, because this whole pasuk was chosen for drasha purposes. So therefore, we're going to say, well, that was the one chosen to learn the drasha, even though this is karet and that's mito beitin. Okay, so we got our answer. Next, this is I would say the most uncomfortable of the topics of today. What if somebody takes a man takes his bar hamin and his private parts and puts it inside himself? Okay, so he's both the shochev and the nishkav in the kind of. Okay, it's a little bit strange, to which the Gemara reacts by saying, right, so they asked Rav Sheshet this question, Amar le kavastan, he said, you're bothering me by asking me this question. Now, not because it's an unpleasant question, really, even though it is. Okay, it's a little disgusting, but he says, I don't even understand your question. It doesn't make any sense, your question. So I'm Rav Ashi, and here Rav Ashi explains why it doesn't even make any sense. It's not really such a question, because Ma'iti Bailach, what are you asking? Because if it's erect, there's definitely no question, because you couldn't even have such a thing happen. If it's not erect, then you could have a question. This is really no question. There's a whole debate in general about whether, if the man is not erect and has relations with one of the arayot, so is he liable or not liable? So if you say he's not liable, then in this case, obviously, he wouldn't be liable. And if you say he is liable, then in this case, he'd be liable too, both for being the shochev and the nishka, both for being the active and the passive. So I don't really understand why you're asking the question. And with that, they move on. Okay. Now we're going to get to the sugya that I would say is a little complicated. It's a little topically, it's a little easier to handle than some of the other material in today's daf. But it's a little less graphic, you could say, although it is still dealing with relations with an animal. But it's a little bit confusing what goes on here. So I'm going to try to explain you the structure outside, and then we'll see it inside, and then we'll repeat it at the end so you follow the structure. We're going to have a question they asked Rav Sheshet. Okay, the question is going to be, I'll already read it. Rav Sheshet, Ovei kochavim habal be'ema mahu. What if you have a gentile who engages in bestiality? Now, we're going to get to the topic now of coming up in the next apin of Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the Noachide laws. In fact, it's the topic already of Daf Michelle Farber that went up yesterday. Now, you have these, it's forbidden, bestiality for Gentiles as well. The question is, do we kill the animal? And the question is here, takala v'kalom be'inan. Okay, do you need, in order to kill the animal, is it because, number one, the animal caused a calamity to happen, meaning caused someone to sin? And because the animal caused humiliation to people, because, right, it's a humiliation for the person to be walking, right, that people say, oh, look, that's the person who slept with an animal. So it's humiliating. So do you need both those criteria in order to kill the animal? This reminds us of the Mishnah. We're going to get back to the Mishnah because I'm going to remind you, what did the Mishnah say? There's two reasons why we kill the animal. So, right, if the person said, why are we killing the animal? And they said, number one, he caused a takala, right? That was one option. And therefore, because he caused a calamity to happen, so we're going to punish him, cause someone to sin. The second thing is, shalote be'ema over b'shuk. We don't want the animal walking around, and people will say, this is the one who got stoned because of that. And it causes humiliation to the person who's not even alive anymore, but we're still concerned for the humiliation. So do you need both those criteria? And in Novei Kochavim, the assumption is, even though someone will suggest later maybe it is, but the assumption is the cologne is not relevant. Either because a Gentile doesn't care, it's not humiliating to the Gentile, or even if it is humiliating to the Gentile, it doesn't interest the Torah so much. The Torah is concerned with Jews and not as much for the humiliation of the Gentile, and therefore, okay, it's maybe just saying in a nicer way, Shav mitzvot b'nei Noach are a little different than our mitzvot, and there's some reason to differentiate, or perhaps the Gentiles of those times didn't find that whole thing humiliating, going back to what I said before about bestiality just being very common. Anyway, for whatever reason, they assume right now that cologne is not relevant in that case. So the question is, do we say in order to kill the animal, you need both? Or it's enough just to have the takala? And here there's a takala because the Gentiles sin, because it's one of the Noachide laws. They're commanded also not to do this. So now let me get to the structure. We started with a question of Rav Sheshet. From here, Rav Sheshet's going to give an answer. There's going to be and then it's going to be a little confusing what goes on. There's going to be a difficulty. There's going to be an answer to the difficulty. There's going to be a difficulty on that. There's going to be a bunch of back and forth there. And Abai and Rav are going to resolve some sort of issue that comes up, each in a different way. From Abai and Rav, they're not really directly, and this is important to understand, they're not directly answering Rav Sheshet's question, but they're actually answering a different question that comes up from what Rav Sheshet answers. But they're not answering the question that was asked of Rav Sheshet. But in the end, Rashi is going to kind of connect the ideas that they're saying to how that relates to Rav Sheshet's answer. And are they agreeing with him or not agreeing with him? Okay, that's going to be, in the end, they're going to kind of say they agree with his conclusion, but not with the content of how he got there. Okay, that's going to be, but I want to point out very clearly that Abai and Rava, the way the flow of the Gemara is, they're not really answering the question. But from what they say and the content of what they say, we can get to an answer. So the first thing we have again, question they ask Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet answers, then a bit of a back and forth about his answer. And within that of Abai and Rav. And then we're going to have a second attempt to answer the question until Rav Sheshet's answer actually is going to stand in the end. Even though Rav and Abai don't really agree with him, they're going to agree with his answer, just not with how he got there. Then we're going to have a second attempt to answer it, actually from our Mishnah. And then they're going to try to infer something from the Mishnah. And then they're going to say, well, actually, you could infer something different, as we see from a question they asked from a question Rav Hamnuna asked. And from there, they're going to get off on a total tangent, leave our sugya, and talk about the question that Rav Hamnuna asked, which is similar but different to the question that they asked Rav Sheshet. And then we're going to have three answers to that, and every answer is going to be rejected. In the end, it's going to be inconclusive, and that's the end of our daf. So that's what we have for the rest of today's daf. So that was the outside structure. We'll learn it inside, and then I'll go back and I'll review the structure. So again, our question is very simple. An oved kochavim who has relations with an animal, do we kill the animal? Do we say you need takala and kalon? You need both calamity and the humiliation or the shame. And there is no shame here, either because the Gentile doesn't have shame or because the Torah is not concerned with the shame of the Gentile. Or do we say, no, it's enough that it caused a takala, cause someone to sin, and we kill the animal just for that alone. So on Rav Sheshet Tanitua, he says, we're going to learn it from a Braita and a different topic. The topic is worshiping idols. And what kind of idol? Well, Asherah was a tree that people use for idol worship. And they say the following. The Torah says you have to burn the Asherah tree. So he says, Ma'ilanot, well, if trees, this is the Braita, this isn't Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet is quoting a Braita to tell us the answer. She'ein ochlim, ve'ein shotim, ve'ein mirichim, they don't eat, they don't drink, they don't smell. Amra Torah hashchet tzrof v'kalei. Torah says, destroy them, burn them, wipe them out completely. Ho'il ubal adam takal yadam. Why is that? Because they caused a person to sin. So So all the more so, an animal who eats, breathes, smells, moves, swayed a person, seduced a person to engage in relations with the animal, and brought this person to their death. Of course, right? If the tree gets destroyed, of course the animal's going to get destroyed. That's Rav Sheshet's proof. To which the Gemara starts with question. And the Gemara says, Ela me'ata. From here, wait a minute. Ovek, then you would assume, now, what are we taking? We're taking a tree that was worshipped idols. We're going to learn from there to an animal that engaged in bestiality with a human. So they say, well, right? And where are we taking it? To a Gentile, right? Now, they say, well, then you would conclude that a Gentile, now remember, what's the problem with Asherah? There's no humiliation there. It's just takala. So that's how we get to the answer, because a Gentile is takala, sin by worshiping, by engaging in relations with bestiality with this animal. So takala is all you need. Gemara says, well, then let's take it to the in-between case. What's in between a Gentile engaging in relations with an animal and a tree being used for idol worship? A Gentile who worships his animal. So if a Gentile worships his animal, what are we going to assume? You're going to kill the animal, and the animal is going to be forbidden to benefit from, right? Titzar umiktala should be forbidden to benefit if a Gentile worships an animal of Avodah Zarah and should be killed. And they're saying, right, that's a question because it doesn't seem like we do that. So if we don't do that, then this doesn't make any sense because that would be in between these two. And if these two are forbidden and get destroyed, then also the animal should be destroyed as well. So the Gemara answers, well, the reason why the animal is not destroyed if the Gentile worships an animal is because mi'i de l'Israel lo asar ulovei kochavim asar. Well, they're assuming right now that a Jew who worships an animal, we don't destroy the animal and it's not forbidden to benefit from. So it wouldn't make any sense that if the Jew does it, we don't kill the animal, but if the Gentile does, we do. And that would explain why, even though maybe logic would state that, if you have the tree is destroyed and the animal that engaged in bestiality is destroyed, you would think the animal who the Gentile worshipped would be destroyed, but it's not, because if we don't kill a Jew, when the Jew worships the animal, we don't kill the animal, then it wouldn't make any sense to kill it when the Gentile does. So now the Gemara says, well, who says the Jew? Maybe the Jew who worships an animal we should kill that animal. Why would it be logical? Well, right, so we're in a question within a question within it, right? We're deep into this sugya, kind of away from our main topic. But they say now, Yisrael gufe litzar midi dehave arevia. Well, wait a minute. If we kill, like our Mishnah said, an animal that engaged in bestiality with a Jew, maybe we should kill an animal who a Jew worshipped as an idol. So that's their question right now. So this is all, okay, if you look at the chart, no, it's not a chart, I just kind of sectioned it off. I just want to review because it's a little complicated. We had a question they asked Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet answered from the case of the trees, the Atzei Asherah. From there, the Gemara questioned, well then, the Gentile who worshipped an animal should also be killed because it's right in between those two cases. And they said, oh, we're not going to kill that because we don't kill a Jew. A Jew who worships an animal, we don't kill the animal. And they said, maybe you should. Maybe we do kill a Jew who worships an animal, just like in bestiality. So if we're going to kill the animal who engaged in bestiality, we should kill the animal who the Jew worshipped. And now we're going to answer that question. So we're within a question within Rav Sheshet. In the end, we're going to answer that question, have some difficulty with the question, with the answer also, and a little back and forth up there. But in the end, we're going to have that answer answered, which is then going to say that explains, and therefore we have no question really on Rav Sheshet, and Rav Sheshet's answer is going to stand. The whole problem with Rav Sheshet is if you're going to learn from the Asherah to the bestiality, what about that middle case? And the answer is the middle case is a different reason. If the Jew, we're not going to kill them, we're not going to kill when the Gentile does it also. And that answer is going to stand. But the question is, why? And now the whole question is, maybe the Jew should be killed and then the Gentile should be killed also. But they're going to say we don't kill the Jew who worships an animal. Why is that? So now they're going to say, and why don't we learn it from bestiality where the animal gets killed? So for that, we're going to have two answers, Rav and Abai. Amar Abai, first Abai. The reason why we don't kill an animal who a Jew worship the idol is because that's not so humiliating for the Jew. If people walk around and say, oh, that's the animal that person worshipped, people don't look at that person and say, oh, horrible person. They do say that's the one who that person engaged in bestiality. Bestiality is like really disgusting. So that is a huge humiliation for a person. To say they worshipped idols, interestingly, because you would think idols is pretty humiliating, but it's not the kind of, I would say like your body, it's humiliating because of what you did with your body, right? People say, oh, you engaged in bestiality. That's absolutely disgusting. That's a huge humiliation, huge shame for that person. The fact they worshipped idols, not so humiliating. That's why, according to Abai, we don't kill the animal. To which the Gemara says, but what? Go back to the trees. The trees was idol worship, and we killed the trees. Okay, this is a good Tu B'Shvat sugya, although maybe a bad Tu B'Shvat sugya, because you'll see what the Gemara is going to say right now. But harei lano te'en klona merubah, right? They don't have merubah. They don't cause huge shame to the person, and yet amra Torah shchetz chof v'kaleh, we destroy it completely. To which the Gemara answers, b'balei chayim kamrinan dechas rachmana alayu. The reason, now here is an interesting, why did we get from this range where we have trees we destroy for idol worship, we have animals we destroy for bestiality, but we don't destroy animals who were worshipped as idols? Because the Torah has rachmanut on animals. Because animals are living things, and trees, this is why I said it's a bit anti-Tu B'Shvat, right? As much as we're celebrating this week the trees and how amazing they are, and they do have life in them, but they're not the same life as animals. Animals are kind of like in a higher level, and the Torah had more rachmanim on them. Okay, the Torah was more compassionate to the animals and didn't want to kill animals unless they had to. So for the trees, it's enough just cause small embarrassment that people will say, oh, this person worshiped that tree. Okay, but when it comes to the animal, you're only going to kill an animal if you have significant reason, like the humiliation is huge. Okay, that's Abaye's answer. Rava Amra Torah behema nehenek be'averat ha'arek. Rava has a totally different explanation. Rava says it's because the animal gets killed in bestiality, because the animal benefited. The animal got pleasure from that. Now, an animal that was worshipped as an idol, animal doesn't really understand, oh, I was made to be an idol, and really gets benefit from that. But sexual benefit, for sure they get. So that's why in bestiality, the animal will be killed, but not in idol worship. Okay, so we have two explanations. I even charted it on the second side of the sheet. Why a Jew who bows down to an animal, the animal will not be killed, but a Jew who bows down, who engages in bestiality with the animal will be killed. Either because the humiliation is greater. What about the tree? Oh, we distinguish trees and that. Or because the animal benefits. Of course, they're going to ask, according to Rava, the same question. They're going to ask the same question and answer the same answer, which is, well, the trees didn't benefit from idol worship, so why were they destroyed? Again, okay, because it was talking about animals, right? Animals the Torah had compassion on. Torah was less compassionate when it came to the trees because there's less life in the trees. Okay. So this was all within Rav Sheshet. Okay, now I want to point out very clearly, Rav Sheshet was asked a question about a gentile engaging in bestiality. When we got to this question about, well, what then theoretically a gentile who worships idols, an animal, we should kill the animal as well. That was the difficulty with Rav Sheshet, and because we don't do that. And then they said, well, the reason we don't do that is because we don't kill it when a Jew bows down to an animal. And then they said, maybe we should. Maybe we should even kill the Jew who bows down to an animal. From that, we got off on a tangent. That wasn't our main topic. And the discussion between Rav and Abai was about a Jew bowing down to an animal and whether you get killed or not. And they each had different reasons. Now, Rashi here says, but let's take what they're saying and apply it back to Rav Sheshet. So in the Rashi, Dibor Matchil Mu'at, okay, it's in my Gemara, it's about 7 lines from the bottom. Zeklono de avodah zara mu'at, that's an Abaye, that the humiliation for avodah zara is much less. He gives two suggestions of the connection because what Rashi wants to do is, well, in the end, they're talking about similar things. It's true, one's talking about Jew, one's talking about Gentile, but it still relates to the same topics that would perhaps answer the question that Rav Sheshet was asked. So he says, Usfira leila Abaye takala v'kalom be'inan, delate lehudu Rav Sheshet. Now, Rav Sheshet said, all you need is takala, sin. And then and just like we have sin and not humiliation by the Eitz Hashera, we're going to learn the same thing for the bestiality with the Gentile. There's only takala, there's no kalon, you're forbidden. Now, Abai wouldn't agree with that because he says you need takala and kalon. So perhaps he disagrees with Rav Sheshet. Inami or sfira lekavate, demitoch sheklono merubeh ika kalon va'afilu me'avei kochavim. He says, wait, or perhaps he would say, and this is what I suggested before, maybe there is shame for the Gentile as well. Who says there's no shame for a Gentile walking around and people saying, oh, that person engaged in bestiality? They might also be shameful of the whole thing. So it could be that it's just not, it doesn't answer the question, takala b'li kalon. It answers the question, Gentile, he defined it differently. that would be kalon also for the Gentile, perhaps. And then you would say, right, but mihu mi'ilanot lo gamarla. But for sure he doesn't learn from trees, because he makes a big distinction between trees, whereas Rav Sheshet thought the whole limud would come from trees. And Abai for sure disagrees with that. And when it comes to Rava and the Dibor Matcha Rava Amar, I'm skipping the first 10 words. Gabe ove kochavim habal be'ema ki Rav Sheshet svira le dehai tanya me'aveira. Now he would say, when it comes to a Gentile, since a Jew with a Gentile, if the animal benefits, if the Jew with the animal benefits, we're going to kill the animal, and that's Rava's whole thing. Then, of course, with the Gentile, we're going to kill the animal because the animal benefited, right? There was pleasure for the animal. So he would agree, but he also wouldn't learn it from the tree, because remember, we also make the distinction between the tree case. Okay, but he would agree because of this issue of the animals get pleasure. Not, again, agrees with his conclusion, but not with his process, not where he got there. Okay, that was all the first attempt to answer the question they asked Rav Sheshet, which was Rav Sheshet's answer, and then we had a whole diyun about Rav Sheshet's answer, which led us to this other topic of a Jew, and do we kill the animal or not in the idol worship versus bestiality, why we distinguish between the cases, two different approaches. Now we're going to have the second answer. The second answer, Tashma, it's going to be a little simpler. Davar acher. Now they're going to quote the Mishnah. Remember, the Mishnah said, why do we kill the animal? Number one, it created a takala, which is the word we keep using, and we used it probably because of the Mishnah. Okay, takala, it caused someone to sin. Number two, we don't want the animal to be walking in the shuk, and people say, oh, that's the one, and caused humiliation. So what do you see here? The beginning talks about takala. The second part talks about the kalom, but what are they going to say? That the case of lo tebeim, davar acher, lo tebeim over b'shuk v'yomru, zosh is called ploni al yada. They're going to assume this is, which category would it be? Well, it's kalon, humiliation, the shame. That's what it's all about. It's obviously also takala, because, right, we assume it's a case of takala, where someone sinned. So it's got both. So that's what the Gemara says, turning out on a bet. My lav mi deseifa takala v'kalon. Now they're going to say the following. And remember this, because we're going to go back to this and end the daf with this as well, from a different perspective. But the end has takala and kalon. First of all, the person sinned. Second of all, there was humiliation. That's the whole point. There's going to be shame for that person. Well, if the second part is talking about takala v'kalon, we're going to assume the first part of the Mishnah, the first answer, is not parallel. So it must be missing one, right? So what's it missing? Well, obviously, what's it missing? The kalon. Because it says, reisha takala below kalon. The reisha focuses on the takala. It says, because this animal caused a takala, we're going to kill the animal. Takala we equate as cause someone to sin. So what could possibly be now? If the second part is already talking about a case where there's also takala and there's also shame, then the first part must be talking about with only one of them. And then what do you see? We kill the animal anyway. So what would be takala below kalon if not our case? Hechidami, and here's our answer. It must be the Reisha must be talking about when it said this animal is killed because it caused a takala. Must be when it only caused a takala, meaning a Gentile who slept with this animal. To which the Gemara says, no, you don't necessarily have to assume that the Mishnah was talking about a Gentile who slept with an animal in the case where there's only takala alone. You could say differently. You could say the following: Lo, seifa takala v'kalon. Reisha hakamat. Now, it's going to have to be different than the Seifa. And the Seifa for sure is takala and kalon. Well, there's two ways it could be different. You could say the Reisha is only takala, or you could say the Reisha is only kalon. And that's what they're going to suggest. They're going to say, perhaps, and this is just a perhaps. In other words, we have two perhaps now. It could be talking about a Gentile, which would teach us an answer to Rav Sheshet's question, but it's to the question they asked Rav Sheshet, or it could be it's not. And therefore, we can't use this as an answer. And like I said, we're going to come back to these two ways of interpreting this Mishnah later on as well. You could say, Reisha kamashmalan dafilu kalon below takala nami machayve. What if it was just shame, but there was actually no sin? Now, what would the case be? Okay, hechidami, or no calamity, as we call it. I'm using the Koren's translation for this. Yisrael habala beima b'shogeg. What if a Jew engages in bestiality with an animal b'shgaga? Okay, they didn't realize. I know they didn't realize. After they didn't realize what they were doing. I don't know. I don't know exactly which gaga is, but maybe they just didn't know it was forbidden. And then because they didn't know it was forbidden, it's not called a calamity. It's not a sin. Anything b'shgaga is not really a sin. I mean, it is a sin. You bring a sin offering, but it's not calamity like we kill the person. So, right, death penalty. They don't get the death penalty. So they could say the reisha is not talking about, or at least again, both are possibilities. It's either talking about takala no kalon or kalon no takala. It's either talking about a Gentile who have relations with an animal where there's only takala, there's no kalon, or it's talking about a Jew who did it bishgaga where there's no takala, there is kalon. Okay? Now, here comes our lead into the other. We're going to segue off of the sugya right now because now they're going to say, Uchidabai Rav Hamnuna, and exactly as Rav Hamnuna asked. In other words, we had this question of Rav Sheshet about the Gentile when it was only takala, no kalon. And now we're going to see that Rav Hamnuna himself asked a question about the only kalon, no takala, Jew who has relations with an animal unwittingly. Shogeg. Do we kill the animal or not? He asked that question. For that, we're going to bring three answers, and for that, we're going to reject all three answers. Okay? And that's where, in the end, we're going to say none of them are conclusive. Debai Rav Hamnuna, and that's going to take us to the end of the daf. So we're done with Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet, the question they asked Rav Sheshet answered. His answer actually seems to stand. According to him, we would kill. But the second attempt to learn it from our Mishnah itself doesn't. Okay, that was unsuccessful. Because our Mishnah could be interpreted in two ways, and we're going to come back to that in the third answer for Rav Hamnuna. Because if we read our Mishnah as Rav Hamnuna, then we would get an answer to Rav Hamnuna's question. You follow that? If not, don't worry, we'll get to it. So, here's his question. To buy Rav Hamnuna. And again, it's the flip of the question they asked Rav Sheshet. Yisrael haba'al be'ema. If a Jew engages in bestiality with an animal b'shogeg, unwittingly, meaning there's no real sin here, mahu. What's the case? Do we say takala v'kalon be'inan, v'hacha kalon ika takala leka? Do you need, in order to kill the animal, do you need both calamity, that we're going to kill this person for the sin they did, and kalon, that it's humiliating? Or, right, but here, hacha kalon ika takala leka, but here we're not going to kill the person. There's just humiliation for them because they did this action, but there's not takala. Odilma kalon alpha pisha ain takala, or is it humiliation? Is that enough? The shame caused to this person that they're going to talk about him this way, even though there's no takala and the person isn't killed. So first attempt to answer this, we're going to quote a source from Nida. I think it's a Mishnah even. Tashma, bat shalosh shanim v'yom echad, mitkadeshet bibi'ah. Okay, we're going to have a long Mishnah here, a long list of things. Also, the next one, they're going to talk about a girl who's 3, and then they're going to talk about a boy who's 9. So the distinctions we came up with before. You see the very interesting and kind of strange about minors that you might be surprised by. I was. Tashma. Bat shalosh shanim v'yom echad. So we have a girl who's 3 years in a day. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean she's 3 years in a day. It means anywhere above that, right? She could be 11, but under gil mitzvot, under 12 and 2 simanim. Mitkadeshet bibi'ah. Okay, if the father marries her off and she has engaged in some relations with her betrothed husband, so right, there's something about you could do betrothal with relations. She's considered, it's kiddushin. V'im ba'aleha yabam, and if she was married, right, and then, or betrothed, and then her husband died and they had no children, which would be likely if she's underage, right, then the yabam has relations with her. Yibum in general is sealed by having relations, so she becomes his wife. V'chayavim aleh mishum eshet ish, if she's betrothed, she's already, right, at this age, right, this is to anybody, not just the Yabam, but she's considered an Eshet Ish, and this means maturity for the purposes of sexual relations, which comes into play when it comes to marriage, betrothal, all that. She's considered an Eshet Ish, so if someone has relations with her, they're going to get killed if it's Arayo, right, or not even if it's Arayo, right, if she's a married woman and someone else does, they'll be killed, right, she won't be because she's underage for punishment, okay? This is laws of Tum and Tara. A man who is Boel and Nida, when she's in Nida, she has relations with a man. He has the level of Tuma. He becomes Tameh like a Zav, which means anything he lies on, like let's say you have 10 mattresses. I always think of the Princess and the Pea. The bottom one even is forbidden. That's this Tachton, Ke'elyon. Like if he were carrying something on a tray, that object, that's Elyon, would be Tameh. Also, the 10th mattress all the way at the bottom will also be Tameh. Because that's the tomb of Mishkav. Anything he sits on, even leans on, right? Even if he's not touching it, it will be forbidden. Niseit lekohen ochela b'truma. If she marries a kohen, she eats truma. She's really considered his wife for all intents and purposes, even though she's a minor. Ba'alei achamin apsulim salam and a. If she sleeps with a mamzer or one of those people that after she does that, we learned this, right? She can't marry a Kohen anymore, and she can't go back and eat truma in her father's house. If, let's say, she was a Bat Kohen and she's no longer married to him, that ruins her for good. Now, here's the important line. And if anyone who sleeps with her, any arayot, this woman sleeps with, right? Not even if she's a married woman, she's not married, but her father or an animal. Okay, if an animal has relations with her, they get killed because of her. Now she's exempt, but he gets killed, right? Including the animal. And that's what the Gemara is going to say here. Be'ema is one of the arayot. The animal will get killed. So what do you see here? What would you call this? Kalon. It's humiliating. It's shame. But it's not calamity because she's not killed. Now would be a perfect answer to our question. The animal gets killed even though there's only the shame part. Right? It says they get killed, so there's your answer. Here's the fascinating line. And I'll tell you, if your Hebrew's good, Dr. Merav Tubal-Kana and Sugabak Tana on our site, this week is all about Ketanim and responsibility when it comes to punishments and when it comes to Isurim, and fascinating topic because we usually say, what do you mean? They're not obligated at all. But what does the Sugya say here? Kevan de mizidahi takala nami ika. Rachmanahu dechas alei. Alei didachas, al didachas abema lo chas. So they say the following. Since this child, now this is why it's hard to say she's 3, she did it b'mezid. She did it intentionally. Now, how do we know she did it intentionally? Well, they assume this mission must be telling intentionally because otherwise, why would you say exempt? Of course, she's exempt if it wasn't intentional. Nobody, even if she was grown up, it wouldn't be, she would be exempt. So it must be she intended. Now, what's fascinating about this? We usually say Ketana doesn't have da'at. So how could you be intentional without really having halachic da'at, knowledge? What this is saying is there is such a thing. You could intentionally want to sin. And really, the Torah should have obligated you. But what? They feel bad for you. It's like juvenile court, right? Juveniles do terrible things sometimes, but, we can't really judge them, but we also can't leave them and let them go scot-free. Like, we do hold them somewhat responsible for what they do. So it's a fascinating topic. And the Torah basically says, again, this is an answer to a difficult, right? They want to prove something and say, well, you can't necessarily prove it because perhaps you could look at this way. Doesn't mean you have to look at it this way, but it's a possible way to look at it. She really did something terrible. She slept with an animal. That's bad. Okay? Yeah, she's a minor, but she should have known better. And she should have really been punished for it. And therefore, we're going to call this takala. This is takala and kalon. It has both. Now, takala, we said calamity, which means the person, right, it brought someone to sin. And we said it also brought upon their death. Now, here we have takala without the death. So you see, takala is just causing someone to sin. The fact that she doesn't get punished for it is because the Torah had rachmanut. They felt bad for her. On the animal, they didn't, but on her, they did. Okay? Remember, before we said on the trees, right, there's no rachmanut on the animals, there is. But in this case, the animal engaged in bestiality with her. We're not going to have rachmanut on the animal, but we are going to have rachmanut on her. Amar Rav. We're going to do a very similar thing with the next source. Tashma, let's learn from here. Ben tesha shani v'yom echad. Now we're at the boy. So a boy at that age, already 9 years old, habal yivim tokana. He engages in relations with his yivama, his brothers, whatever. He already acquires her as his wife because, again, sexual relations from that age is considered sexual relation. Ve'eno noten get deal, but he can't divorce a woman until he's actually of age. Mitame kenida l'tamei mishkav tachton ve'elyon. Okay, he's like the nida that if he engages in relations with the nida, then he actually has this tumah mishkav tachton ke'elyon, like we said before. Posel, he can mess up. Let's say he's a mom's there and he sleeps with this woman who's a bat kohen. He messes her up. She can't marry a kohen anymore. Ve'eno ma'achil. He doesn't allow her, though, to eat truma if he marries a woman who's not a bat kohen. Uposel tamei ma'al gabei mizbeach. If he engages in relations with an animal, the animal can no longer be brought as a sacrifice. Viniskelet al yado. This is the key line. The animal is stoned on account of him. Okay, because he engaged in bestiality, even though he was underage. So we'll see in a minute where we go. And the last thing, which is less relevant here because the animal is mentioned explicitly in the previous line, right? If he comes upon any of the arayot, then he gets killed. Now again, what's the situation here? There's kalon, right? But there's no takala because he's underage. He doesn't get punished. The animal gets stoned. That should be an answer to our question. But you know where the Gemara is going already? Not necessarily, because kevan de mezidhu takala namiika, because he was intentional about it, must be, we call this takala, and it has takala and kalon. And again, Why doesn't he get punished just because Rachmanu dechasale? The Torah feels bad because he's not really of age yet to fully understand. So he's not going to. The Torah is not going to punish him. But again, but we don't have, right. The Torah didn't have as much rachmanut for the animal, and therefore the animal gets killed. And therefore you could say, again, it's a possibility. You could say it's kalon without takala, but you could also say it's kalon vit takala, which wouldn't answer Rav Hamnuna's question. Third answer, this is going to be the easier one because this is the flip of what we did at the very top of the Amud, which is Davar Acher. Let's learn from our Mishnah, where the Mishnah says Davar Acher, second interpretation. Shalote be'emao ver b'shuk. Why do we kill the animal? So that it doesn't walk in the shuk. V'yamru zo shenis kal ploni al yada. Right. It's all because of this animal. This person was stoned. My lav midasefa takala v'kalon. Now at the end has both, right, clearly the humiliation and the takala because the person was killed. Which means the Reisha must be, now before, what did we say the Reisha was? Takala without kalon, because it said takala in there, right? That he caused a takala to someone. But now we're going to suggest, as we did in the conclusion of the first one, here it's going to be the suggestion. That's how we got to this whole thing in the first place. In the end, the Gemara said, no, you could say the Reisha is kalon below takala, which is exactly the question of Rav Hamnuna. So now we're bringing as an answer. Oh, that's the question of Rav Hamnuna. The beginning is where there was humiliation, there was the shame, but there wasn't the calamity. What would be the case of our Mishnah? Which is exactly our question. Okay, to which the Gemara answers, as you can guess, the Gemara is going to say, oh, maybe it's the other thing we suggested. Maybe it's the gentile case and not this case. And maybe it's the takala without the kalon. And therefore we have no conclusion. And that's what we're going to say. And that's what we're going to end today. Lo sefa takala vikalon, resha takala below kalon. The sefa you could say is takala and kalon, that everyone agrees with. The reisha is takala without kalon. Vehechidami, and what would be the case of the reisha? Ovei kochavim abala beima ukidibal minei Rav Sheshet. They come full circle. This is basically what we call the mirror sugya of that one. That one started with our conclusion and ended with our suggestion. This one starts with the conclusion of that one and ends with the suggestion of the previous, and says maybe it's actually answering Rav Sheshet's question and not this one, and therefore we're left without an answer entirely for the question Rav Hamnuna asked about the Jew who sleeps with the animal bishkaga. It's unclear if there's just kalon, no takala, we don't know. But if there's takala without kalon, we did have Rav Sheshet's answer before, and even Abai and Rava, who seem to possibly agree with him about the conclusion, just maybe not about how he got there, that you would actually kill the animal in the case of the gentile who sleeps with the animal, because there is a takala, it did cause the death of someone or cause them to sin. And with that, we got into all these interesting issues about ktanim, and do we hold them somewhat responsible for their actions, even though maybe not fully responsible. And with that, we finished for today. And the beginning, just to review our daf, was about different issues that come up about homosexual and bestiality issues. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day. We are starting a new Mishnah tomorrow, leaving these topics. We're going to get to smiles, megadef. Okay, someone who curses God, totally different topic. The next in the list of those who get stoned. That we will meet up tomorrow.